Hello and welcome to the Cuyamungue Institute, our Q&A Conversation for Exploration series. I'm Paul Robear, the Executive Director and President of the Institute, and along with my wife, Laura Lee, the Director of Research, Education, and Outreach. And on behalf of our Board of Directors, our advisors, our volunteers, and supporting members, we want to thank you for joining us today. The Cuyamungue Institute is an independent, nonprofit research organization committed to researching consciousness and the human experience following the footsteps of our founder, anthropologist Dr. Felicitas Goodman. And as an educational institution, we take an open approach, so we invite scholars in related fields to help broaden the scope of our own work and exploration, and that's why we call this Conversation for Exploration. On these weekly Sunday discussions, we've included a full spectrum of topics from neuroscience and anthropology and art history, archaeology, mythology, archaeoastronomy, and much, much more. You're welcome to visit us at our website at cuyamungeinstitute.com. All of our presentations are free, and as a nonprofit, of course, we invite you to become a supporting member, and we want to thank you, the community members who continue to support the mission of the Cuyamungue Institute. Let's get to today. We bring together the three professors, all of who have shared with us their stories, their fieldwork and observations. Together they join us as we continue to ponder and help unravel this puzzle of the human story, from anthropology, archaeology, comparative religions, spiritual beliefs, to the origins of rituals through the eyes of theater. Together they bring encounters from India, the land of the Vedas, to the native cultures of the Southwest and Mexico, to Africa, Russia, Alaska, and the Far East. So we're so pleased and honored to welcome the three of you back and excited to explore with you your unexplained encounters in the field.
You know, what do we make of these encounters? We've all had them to some degree. How do we interpret them? How do we integrate such occurrences that we've actually witnessed into our own personal worldview and our collective worldview? If we cannot talk about these events openly, and yet we're all having them at some point, then what's missing here? Well, I think, for one thing, some fascinating conversation to really dissect these, to understand these. What are the circumstances these happen in? What do you do with them? What changes around them? I know with my own witnessing of events, it's like time slows down and you go into a witnessing state. You're actually thinking to yourself, I'm witnessing this, I'm encountering this, I know this is unusual, you can hear a buzzing around it. It's almost as though you're not touching the ground any longer. Your feet are anchored on some other plane. It's a real interesting phenomenon, the experience of it. What do we make of it? Under what circumstances? What I think is interesting is our guests today have all had stories that they've shared with us in their own solo appearances with us, telling us about their own fieldwork, their own observations. And it's around ritual that they've each said that they've had these encounters. With our anthropologist, Christine VanPool, who teaches at the University of Missouri, it was at an ancient ritual site. With Fredrick Smith, professor emeritus at University of Iowa in classical Indian religions, it was around witnessing rituals in remote areas. And with Thomas Riccio, professor of visual and performing arts at the University of Texas, Dallas, it was in working with indigenous cultures around the world, creating theater and being invited to witness rituals. And so here, I find it fascinating to focus on rituals. What is the power of ritual to step into, maybe across that threshold into something else? So we want to welcome our guest today. I'm going to have you just say a few words, each of you, and then I want to ask you for an in-depth story of your fieldwork. And ladies first, we're going to start with you, Christine. Christine.
Hi, everyone.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
I can, yep.
Oh, good. I'm not used to my new headphones, so I always want to yell because there's no mic sitting here. Anyway, good morning, in my world this morning. Good morning to everyone. I hope you are well. Thanks for joining us. So you had a couple questions for us, Laura, before we started. You wanted
I
to
just
have
want
us.
to just have you comment generally on the unexplained, a little bit what we're going to talk about. I want to talk to you each for a minute or two before we dive into your more lengthy stories each. So any thoughts on your fieldwork? I know
I've had unusual things happen to me, and I once was sharing what the story I'm going to share in a little bit to an archaeologist who's dug the most number of Maya kings and queens. I told him some of the things that happened to me in the field, and he goes, "Chris, you're a mystic." I said, "I'm not a mystic." He's like, "You're a mystic." I'm like, "I am not a mystic. I am a good scientist." And then when I thought about it, I'm like, yeah, I've had such weird things happen that you're left wondering, how do you conceptualize, what do you do with these weird events that happen to you? So anyway, we'll talk about that in a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's exciting to know we're not alone. It happens to everybody. And really, one of our goals is to bring this out into the mainstream and make it fit for polite conversation, that you don't get that immediately. I don't want to hear it. I can't hear it. I don't know what it means. It didn't happen. I doubt it. You know, it's happening. Why not trust our own experiences?
It would make sense that there'd be that element of mysticism there, because I mean the whole idea behind being an explorer in the world of science is to look for those edges, to look for those areas that we don't know nothing about yet,
Right.
that we're just trying to discover. So being a mystic would make sense to me in a true scientific form.
And let us never believe that we know it all.
Right, that's
Right.
for sure.
Fredrick, you're joining us from Italy. Thank you for taking time out. And your thoughts on encounters with the unexplained before we hear your full story.
And unmute yourself first.
Oh, you're muted. Yeah. And you're still muted.
He's okay.
Okay, there I am.
There you go.
Listen, first of all, I'm having trouble with my modem, so I have both my telephone on and my laptop, which I would prefer. So if my laptop goes off, I'll just turn up the sound on my phone and use that.
Am I
So you
full
may-
screening you on your right now? Right now, the full screen am I using? Is that the one on your phone or on your laptop?
If you're seeing my face, then it's my laptop.
Okay, we're good.
Good. Okay, second thing, as the unexplained, there's in the circles in which I have inhabited in my fieldwork and in my personal choices, I suppose, nothing is unexplained. There's very little room for no explanation at all. That said, there are some things that are unexplained. And to me, after all of these years of such research and personal quest, I guess you can say, that the most mysterious thing of all that is still unexplained to me is life itself.
Yes.
But whether any of us here has the complete capacity to answer that question remains to be seen. And if it does happen, then so much the better.
Okay.
And I'm looking forward to the answer. So that mystery aside, yes, there's a lot of things that I've encountered because of the nature of my work. I have done a lot of field work into several things in India. One is ancient Vedic ritual as it's performed in contemporary and modern India, which my field work on that began around 1980. So listen to that number and kind of weep for the inexplainable factor of aging. And then
Okay.
the other major thing in which I've actually written a large book on this is deity and spirit possession in India, in South Asia, with extensions into elsewhere in Asia. And in the course of doing that research, which still continues in certain ways, I'm engaged in other kinds of research on it now that are way far from what my book was about. Still, there's a lot of things that would normally be regarded as unexplained. But as I say, within these circles, there are explanations that one may or may not accept, but there are explanations. But I will limit my statement to that at the moment.
Okay. And, we've been pondering the mystery of life for since the inception of human consciousness. We still haven't come to any satisfactory answer.
Right.
But that's the never-ending story, isn't it? Thomas Riccio, boy, you've been around the world and witnessed some interesting rituals, people.
Yeah.
Tell us just a quick insight into the unexplained before we hear all the in-depth stories, if you would.
I think maybe as a general preface, it's a matter of perspective. It's what we're kind of socialized and acculturated to see. And then anything outside of that horizon line, we say is unexplained. So in a way, I think it's a matter of how we look at things. I feel that the horizon line of the world is very, very long, maybe unending. And yet we are trained, educated, acculturated to just perceive in a certain way, a certain limited way. And anything outside of that, either we don't see at all, or we tend to relegate to the unexplainable or marginalize or denigrate or whatever, or lessen its impact and its importance. So that's maybe how my maybe general statement of how to preface my understanding of the unexplainable is that it's beyond what we're trained to, and we're born into a certain way of looking at the world.
Well said.
Which is a call to expand our collective worldview here,
And
which
even-
is a purpose of this very conversation. I know that I talked to Ingo Swann some years ago, and he made an interesting observation that has stayed with me. And he said, our brains are geared, just as Thomas was saying, to understand the world, to navigate our world. And when we come up with phenomenon that we find unexplained, threatening, we sometimes kick it out. We don't have a memory of it. So he said he made a practice of going around and asking people, trying to bring out these weird experiences, because we have a tendency to shove them off to the side and get them out of view and within our own, because we want our world to make sense. And so that which doesn't, we tend to bounce off of.
And
I think was the term.
And as
I think that's true.
Fred pointed out too, and maybe the term unexplained is too limited in some ways. It's not that we can't come up with an explanation. It just may not be the right one. Or we're cautious not to explain something because we don't have enough data, as they say. We don't have enough data yet. We're still looking. But so the idea here is that we're looking at the very edges of what science knows, and then we want to go beyond to say, where's the next area of exploration that really needs to be revealed that we can understand more clearly, and it helps us as a humanity as we go forth.
Yeah, I agree. Christine, do you want to start first and tell us a little bit about your field work and your work in general, to put it into context?
Okay. I agree both with Fred and Thomas that other people have ways of understanding the world in which we may not. So my story actually starts much earlier than the archaeological field work. I was raised in Ruidoso, New Mexico, and Ruidoso abuts the Mescalero Apache tribal reservation. So growing up in New Mexico, I had Apache friends. I can remember in elementary school, the dust devils would come on our playgrounds, and all the Anglo kids would want to run into the dust devils. Big fun. But my Apache friends several times stopped me and said, "You cannot go into that. That's dangerous. That's bad." I'm like, okay, I won't go into it. And then I go on to college, and then I learn more about, it was really ironic to me was I was raised with Apache. I sat in classes with Apache people. I got to go to a private closed ceremonies. I got to witness things. I knew things, but nobody ever told me they were Indians or Native Americans. I just didn't realize that until I went into anthropology. So I had a different worldview. So I go to Eastern New Mexico University in the late 1980s, early 1990s. I decide the anthropology is for me. I want to do archaeological excavations. And in 1993, I have my degree. I'm going to go be an archaeologist, but it's really hard to find jobs. Nobody wants to hire a young person with no field experience. So I took a job at a whole $6 an hour for a company out of Santa Fe, New Mexico. And this company, SWAC, was out of Santa Fe, and they were hiring field workers. So I started at $6 an hour. in 1993, I could work tables and make much more money. So there I am working northwest of Gallup, New Mexico, right off of Navajo Nation. And I'm going to tell you a story that makes sense to the Dene, is what they call themselves, the Navajo. So I've been excavating in October and November and staying in a hotel in Gallup. We would drive out early every morning, be there at the crack of dawn to maximize it. So it was really cold, bone-chilling cold in early November in 1993. I was actually digging a Pueblo 3 site, and I was in a pit house, and we knew it was probably a kiva, one of the earliest kivas. I'm working with a 6-foot-tall Zuni man, and he has the most wonderful sense of humor, very lively. We have lots of good times. We're joking. There are 7 or 8 Navajo excavators on the site, and we all were into pranks, me, the Navajo, and the Zuni man, just pranking people, having a good time. The firm I was working with had us digging 5-centimeter levels instead of our normal 10-centimeter levels. This would do a microseriation. This proved to be very challenging because we were in heavy saturated clay full of water. So when we get out in the morning, I mean, we would just slam the earth for as hard as we could with our picks, smacking it like Bugs Bunny. But the earth was fracturing off at 7-centimeter intervals. So it's too thick. And this is a big deal in contract archaeology. You want this perfect serration, but we can't get the earth to break any other than 7 centimeters. The other problem is you can't get frozen solid earth through a screen, a 1/4-inch screen. So we were down in this kiva, a subterranean pit structure, a religious ceremonial thing many years ago in the past. So we're heaving up buckets and we're dumping it along the side of the rim of the kiva so it'll thaw out in the morning sun so we can eventually screen our dirt to find the smaller artifacts. Well, it's early morning and we're really just pounding the earth as hard as we can through frozen dirt. And you build up a sweat, so you're in layers, and it's super cold, but it hasn't been snowing or sleeting, which it had been previously. So it's a really nice morning, sunny, cold, and the earth is cold, the sky is cold. But down in the hole, I took off my jacket, my sweatshirt, and we're joking. We're having a good time talking about the pranks we've been doing, digging and excavating. I don't know why, but I looked up, and there was this hill, and I look up, and there's a dust devil coming straight at us. Like, oh my, uh-oh. And then I realized I had this clipboard, a Rubbermaid clipboard that had all my notes inside of it, a big fat rubber band, but it was on the backside behind the dirt piles. And we get paid for our field notes, and how we do our notes is what's important, not much just digging, but how fast you dig and how good your notes are. But that dust devil's coming straight for my notebook. So I'm trying to get out of this pit, which is cumbersome, standing on a bucket, and the bucket flips, takes me down. But I look up, and this dust devil picks up my clipboard, and it carries it up into about 3-4 feet, and it spins it over, and it drops it. I think, oh, cool. No papers flew. It's still intact. I'm yelling for my partner, Joe, help me, help me. Let's get my notebook. But I watch the dust devil spin back, and it makes another approach, spins up, picks up the clipboard, takes it up like 7 or 8 feet, brings it up, and then drops it further along the rim. And it's still, everything's intact. I'm like, woohoo, good. My paperwork's still intact. Well, I'm still trying to get out of the hole. And that dust devil takes like 2 steps back, comes back in, picks up my notebook, my clipboard with notes, and throws it up. A third time, yeah. So it goes up, and it's pretty high, and it comes down, and it takes it and brings it along the rim behind my dirt piles. Everything's still intact. I'm like, whoo. So by this time, I'm finally out of the frickin' hole. I'm struggling to get out of this hole, just like a race with me and this dust devil. I'm coming around the corner of it, running into the dust devil. And this dust devil then swirls even faster, picks up my clipboard, and I watch it go really high. It comes up, and that clipboard, which is Rubbermaid, and it's super cold. It shouldn't have been able to do this. But when it hits the ground, it almost looks like a fist hits it, and it bows up like a fist. And then my papers all go spinning up. And then I'm watching them spin and head east toward Albuquerque, New Mexico. And I'm standing there looking up, and the paperworks end up looking like little tiny white butterflies flying up, circling out. And I watch until I can no longer see them heading east. And I'm standing there stunned, just like, I'm sure I'm like watching this thing.
Wow.
And I go over, collect my clipboard, which is on the ground, and a compass and a engineer scale that I always carry. I take it down and I hop back in the hoe, and I'm looking at my partner, and he was a really nice, beautiful, darker skinned Zuni man with dark eyes. His skin is white, probably like my headphones, just really white. He looks pale and his eyes are like saucer. And in all my wisdom, I asked him the stupidest question ever. Are you okay? He doesn't respond, but I think me being there looking at him, he says, I'm going to lunch. So it's way before 10 a.m. He tells me he's going to lunch. I'm like, okay. And then that night, so he and all the Navajo excavators take off. And I'm sitting there thinking about all this. So before that dust devil came up, we were coming down on bone fragments, small bone fragments. Those could either be a sign of a burial, which would be really unusual in the Kiva, or maybe deer. So in small fragments, deer bones are porous, human bones are porous. It's hard to tell them apart. So I kept thinking we're coming down on something. So my head from childhood and undergrad was like a Navajo Chindi. These are the malevolent spirits of a human. The good aspect of a Navajo goes on to the other world. And they're malevolent, not because they're evil or mean, but more because they're lonely, they're traveling, they're wanting to get their kin into death with them, and so they can travel together. So if you ever see dust devils in multiples in the American Southwest, that's considered a family of related Chindis going along. But that night, as I'm in the hotel frantically trying to recreate all my paperwork, I was thinking that thing seemed so real. It was like taunting us back and forth, getting more and more aggressive until the fourth time it took all of our paperwork. The next day, I was called from another firm in Albuquerque, New Mexico, SWAC, just off by one letter, offered me a job in Albuquerque. And I thought, yeah, I'm taking it. That's a really good idea. That was something not right about all that in the field. So years later, I've been wondering what was found in that kiva. So the SAAs were in St. Louis about 15 years later. I asked the owner, Sherry Schick, in the bar overnight. I said, so what about that dust devil? And she's like, what are you talking about? So her field director didn't know what happened. So I told her this story, and the owner of the firm said, well, that makes a lot of sense. I'm like, what do you mean that makes a lot of sense? She goes, the Navajo would not work for me ever again. Nobody would touch my site. So I had to give up my contract with Navajo Nation. But I suspect that the Zuni man and all the Navajo people knew that was a Chindi. They went and probably found a medicine man or woman and did a sweat lodge purification, because those are so dangerous, they can take you into death. So I think that's what they did. They went and got help immediately from the people that knew how to deal with these things. But it ended up being a deer burial, which is really unusual in those pit houses. So it's a strange burial, strange stuff going on. It wasn't human, it was deer, but it just left myself and those excavators not wanting to work for that company anymore.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, it's one of the ones where you're like, I don't know half of what I thought I knew. Something really happened. It seemed animate. It was alive. And
A
Anyway,
dust devil,
cool.
how big was the dust devil? And you could see it because it picked up dust. So you're seeing
Right.
this vortex.
Right.
Just
And
come
yeah.
and-
I would say it was probably, I don't know, 9-10 feet wide. It wasn't a tornado, but it was a good sized dust devil. And, you know, in science, we say, well, you get tornadoes or dust devils because of differential temperatures, right? So you have the difference between the earth and the air temperature, something like that. But all I know is it's really cold, and it didn't make sense to see a dust devil in November. For me, it just seemed odd, out of place.
Growing up there, you already had an orientation to be respectful of the indigenous worldview. It was something that you saw around you. It wasn't an odd thing for you to
Right.
have that, having that kind of a world. So you went there, even though you had pursued the world of science and you were standing in this kiva as a scientist doing everything in the proper protocol. Then you have this thing happening, but you also have the sense to respect, to know that something different's happening here, that is not just a depression of air and something, there's something more going on here.
Right,
And,
absolutely.
I mean, that's what's really fascinating about this. And I think that's why everybody on screen here continues to pursue this area of we're calling it unknown, but this area of unexplained, because it's that element of being respectful to that there are other elements to life that we just don't know about. We can't just dismiss. And so I'm just really impressed with that and how you were able to make that.
Or as Thomas points out, and Fred, it's within, and Christine, it's within other worldviews, just not our Western worldview.
Yeah.
So, I mean, encounters like that, you can begin to understand the indigenous worldview.
Yeah.
Right? It's born of direct experience.
Yeah.
To piece the world together.
And before we go on to the other two stories, do either one of you want to ask Christine a question, Fred or Thomas?
Or comment?
Or comment.
Well, I really appreciate your story, Christine, because it brings back to me very deeply some similar experiences that I had of about, I was pretty young at the time, but yes, there's some magic that happens in some of these places in New Mexico, that's for sure.
And you grew up in Santa Fe area.
Yeah, I grew up in Santa Fe, and so yeah, it really brought a lot of stuff back into my mind in a really nice way. Like what you said.
I like the addition of the other animals. The deer, there was a deer ceremony there. Something happened to honor a deer, and then the paperwork looks like butterflies as it takes flight. And so you wonder, what were you not supposed to know?
Right. Or what was I not supposed to report? Or was it really to get us out of the hole and make sure we didn't do it? Well, the Zuni man and I didn't do it. So I knew about the Apache and the Navajo. It wouldn't be until I was later a professor and found the right ethnography. But the Zunis themselves believe that dust devil carries sickness and disease. So for the Navajo excavators, they probably thought that was Chindi, but for probably the Zuni man, he probably thought that was disease and illness and death coming. So either way, not a good omen. Yeah. But we left. I mean, all of us left, gone.
Yeah. And left it, So interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
Warning signs. Pay attention to the warning signs, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Again, that idea of being respectful, and that Christine had that intuitiveness, like the dust devil. It means something. They've told me it means something. I'm going to step back. I'm going to respect it.
And then the job comes. The other job comes.
Yeah,
so
right.
is that a coincidence right there?
That goes back to debate.
Let me just add one quick thing. It did feel like a child. At the time, I thought it was like a child throwing a tantrum, getting more and more assertive until that final approach, the way it was two-stepping back and forth along that rim and kind of getting further away from where I'd naturally go out. In retrospect, I would have been better to go the other direction. I would have intercepted, but it was like a kid, felt like a child throwing a tantrum is what it felt like at the time. It was overwhelming, like a tantrum of a child.
Yeah. Wow. So, thank you. Interesting.
Follow up with Fred?
Yeah.
Okay.
Fred, do you want to go next just in case you drop off?
Yeah.
Want to hear your
If I
story?
drop off. Sure. I mean, I don't know.
I meant the
really where to
modem,
begin.
not Fred himself.
I suppose I think I will just follow Christine's lead and just tell a story of my own, because we'll be coming back around several times and we can get into sort of different kinds of waters than this. But there's a lot that's, you can say that's uncanny in the Freudian sense. Or Heimlich was the word he used, and after Schelling, and dissociation and the uncanny. I've written a lot about this in my book, but I guess let's get back to an experience. That's what people want to hear. And well, when I was about 8, I guess there's a couple of things. One is that my 4th grade teacher at Wood Gormley School in Santa Fe, or no, 5th grade was Mrs. Stubbs. And Mrs. Stubbs was married to a very well-known archaeologist named Stanley Stubbs, who did a lot of excavation at a place called Pindi Pueblo nearby to Santa Fe, and other sites. He was extremely well known at the time. And And about that time, I mean, I unlike Christine, I was aware of Native Americans and all of that because my mother was a pediatrician who took care of 5 Indian pueblos and along the Rio Grande north of Santa Fe, basically for free. So we were brought up kind of in that atmosphere. And but my uncle, I had an uncle who lived in Los Alamos. He worked at the labs, and I guess when I was about 8 or 9, whatever it was, he took us out to Bandelier for the first time, which had been actually Bandelier had opened up. I don't know when it opened up, but it opened up around 1915 or 1920, I think, some year like that. So it was already a national park by then, and you know, sort of little awkward kids that we were. We walked up the steps to the ladder up to the big kiva up at the top of Bandelier, and this is really quite similar to other experiences I've been having since about the age of 4, and I kind of looked up, you know, down into the kiva. You look up into the kiva, and suddenly the whole thing just shifted around, and there was nothing left up there at all except like some kind of penetrating force from the sky itself. And I got out and I climbed out, I looked down, and I saw people doing whatever they were doing way down below, walking. Kids were on the deck ready to go down into the kiva as I was, and thought, you know, I'm not sure what's going on around me, but I know one thing for sure, is that whatever those kids are, I'm not one of them, and I don't know what I am. And that was just fine with me, but it was my big secret for some reason, 8-year-old or 9-year-old. And then Mrs. Stubbs got her husband to take us to the class, the 5th grade class at Wood Gormley, to Pecos ruins, which were not quite as well developed as they are now. And again, it was like, you know, this is an amazing place, but I thought, you know, I can see all the way to the next world from Pecos ruins, which has always been one of my numero uno sacred places in northern New Mexico. Almost nobody goes there because it's kind of on the wrong side of Santa Fe, but it's in that way. I highly recommend that any of you in the area should make a field trip or 2 or 3 out to Pecos. It's not very well attended, and my brother has been there probably 100 times. That's his touchstone of sacred places, and he's able to tell me everything about the history of the place, you know, without even looking. But so there are these connections we have with some of these places, with some of these things, some of these energies and forces. And Christine hit right into that, and you know, and it's nice to hear the beginnings of her career as an archaeologist. And
it's interesting how these kinds of experiences shape our path, isn't it?
And your case, I mean, here you are, this young lad growing up in Santa Fe, and I know that your life, you continued this journey where you became interested in meditation and all these different disciplines. You expanded, you traveled, you lived in India for all those years, I mean, and you taught. This became a life's journey, and it's all inspired from those moments, maybe as a child, of just seeing the unknown, encompassing that other element of life.
I cannot even tell you, it's probably been 40 years since I've thought of Mrs. Stubbs' husband taking us on the field trip. Christine brought that memory back.
We hear our calling early on, often.
Fabulous.
Thank you, Fred.
Thank you, Fred.
Thomas.
Yes.
Are you going to say, I've had so many, how do I pick one?
Where do you want me to start?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah, it's a big subject that we're getting into and kind of endless. Maybe some personal context, since that's the way train of thought here. I, unlike the others, I wasn't really exposed to New Mexico. I've been to that part of New Mexico, and I like it a great deal. And I often wonder if that has something to do with why there's so many Roswell and UFO interactions there as well. That's something that, of another subject. I was born and raised a Roman Catholic, and they did Latin masses. So that was kind of my initiation, both into touching the mystical world as well as theater, because they're highly theatrical. And as I moved through my career, I've learned to appreciate many things, primarily having worked foundationally with the Alaska Native people, Nupak, Yupik, and Athabaskan. And the one that sticks with me is that chant is how the spirits speak. And I've kind of like given to that. The world is a one large narrative, and it's always dialoguing. And if you're listening, it's actually telling you things. It's talking to you. And to be spontaneous to it, or to be open to it, is something that we have to maybe relax to, because we have these images of how we should proceed and what's rightful and what's socially acceptable that kind of censor or govern us. But if that's released, then, and you start opening up to another way of like being in the world. And my own kind of personal journey, not that I'm working now on a travel memoir, and that's why I'm kind of like thinking about it. But I took the job in Alaska, having been a theater person working off Broadway and working in film, et cetera, in New York City and Chicago, because I was burnt out, and I realized that this is not satisfying. And I saw an ad in a newsletter for jobs, and it said University of Alaska. I didn't even know there was a university in Alaska when I applied, and it was an emergency hire. And so they talked to me over the phone, et cetera, and they hired me. And the only reason I even applied was because several years before, I was spending the summer in Alberta with my ex-wife's family's friend. And I asked him, I admired this man, and I said, if you were my age, what would you do? He says, I'd go to Alaska. And that's the only reason I did it. I applied because I admired this guy, and that's chance. And it's like, okay, he made an impression on me. I enjoyed it. It stuck in my head. I saw Alaska. I didn't know there was a university in Alaska. And it's like, he said it. He said to go to Alaska. He told me that he was talking to me. So I went, and it took 10 days to drive there. And it's from Chicago, is where I was living then. And it's, when you get to Calgary, you're halfway to Alaska. I mean, it's just, and the roads get smaller, and there are more grizzly bears, and it gets tougher, slower travel, et cetera. So the third day I was there, I was looking with, I was staying with a man who was my dean, and he says, let's go look for houses to rent. The first house I saw was on the lake, on the Tanana River, and it was on a rock bluff, and it overlooked 120 miles of virgin forest and a southern view. And beyond that was the Alaska Range. And so it's like an 800 square foot cabin. And I go, wow, this is like my image of like what Alaska should be, right? And it was like 5 acres, and I didn't see or hear neighbors. And I go, well, let me think about it. This is the first one. I don't want to rush into it. And so we're driving back. He goes, I would get it. So I called when I got back to his house, and the woman, Margaret, said, we're so glad you called. We talked to other people, and we really liked you. And we're glad that you can take it. And so I took it. And that's where I lived the entire 15 years that I was in Alaska.
Wow.
Soon after that, I'm at the university. I get a call from a man in Alaska Native Studies. And he goes, can I see you? And I go, okay. I mean, I'm new in town, so I'll see anyone. And he said, we have an Alaska Native theater group. And if the man who's running it left, the position I had, I took over. He left unexpectedly. And if you don't do it, they'll cut the funding. And I go, hey, funding, I was in Chicago. Don't cut the funding. I'll do it. I didn't know Alaska Natives had theater, and I didn't even know they had Alaska Native, studies in, departments. And so I did it. The next day I went back, and I said, I drove 10 days up to Alaska, and I was always rushed in working in the city. It's always kind of hustling for funding for performances, et cetera. I go, and I resolved with myself, because I drove by myself, I resolved that whatever I did, I had to do well, to the best of my abilities. And he goes, I understand this. And he goes, why don't you take the money, which was like $100,000 a year. He goes, take and use it we'll put some aside, use whatever you want, however you want, fly and make a research project out of it throughout the state. And so it's very expensive flying in Alaska. These 6-seater planes from Fairbanks to Nome is like $500. And then they put you up in $100 a night in, on Savunga in the middle of the Bering Sea, and so it's very hard and very difficult. So I did that for 2 years. Then I began a program and it worked well. Interestingly, the program in our premiere, the first performance, there was a group of Siberians. This is like in 92. So the ice wall, actually 91, the ice wall had just come down and they were flying over, they had flown over, and there was a sister city, people from Yakutsk. And I go to the opening night party at a friend's house, a Russian friend. And I open the door and there's a man there, with a monobrow, and he just embraces me. And I go, and my friend Anatoly, I go, man, Anatoly, what's this guy doing? He goes, he said that the performance he saw is the performance of his people. And he's inviting you to Saha. I go, what's Saha? And it's Siberia. And it's like, and I found out was a shaman. He was a well-known shaman. And because if you know anything about Republic of Saha, they've declared many years ago that as the religion of Saha. And they actually have schools, et cetera, there. For young people to inspire and also to train them. All right. And so a year later, after many faxes, et cetera, I was in Saha. As I was in and still in Fairbanks, I get a call a few months after that. And there's a man, and I'm at my house, and he said in a British accent, "This is Thomas Riccio. I read your article in in this journal about Alaska Natives. Do you want to work with the Zulu?" I go, sure. It's like, who the hell is this? I thought it was a friend of mine, like pulling my leg. And it's like, so I said, and if I found out he had seen my work in Chicago and he knew I could direct and he knew I could, do something that was professional. And they were starting at that point, a part that was falling. This is in 92, 93. I worked there twice. And he said, they have no idea how to develop an indigenous performance group, because their blacks were forbidden to perform because they thought that they could be potentially seditious and start a protest. And so they had no idea. So he wanted me to establish a training program as well as to develop a performance. And of course, as I knew in Alaska, to understand the performance, you need to understand its ritual and mythic traditions. Mm-hmm. So something that I took courses in anthropology at NYU, and I learned from performance studies, about these things, having read Turner, et cetera, and working with Schechner. And so I knew I had to investigate. So part of any agreement I had was that I would investigate and also do research in traditional performance, indigenous performance, and then bring that into my performative work, developing a work, with the groups that I had, the performance groups, which were sometimes traditional, sometimes they were actors we trained, et cetera. So it was an interesting mix. There are two things. I mean, in a way, I said I started with chance is how the spirit speaks. Basically, I've never sought any of my work. Basically, you just kind of like people hear about it and then they kind of come to it, which for me, in a sense, is kind of opening myself. So what I'm maybe proposing is like there's no secret to being in the world. It's just a matter of like maybe a frame of mind or a perception of how you open to the world. I'm talking psychophysically, emotionally, et cetera, and then how you're comfortable you are with that, and how maybe we're trained not to accept and to judge things and to relegate them to this margins. And this has gone on throughout my career. Another time I was from Siberia, I had to find a way to South Africa. And so I, by chance, the last day I left my house in Alaska to fly to Siberia, I put the same like newsletter that I got the first job in Alaska. I just stuffed it my last day of mail. Thereafter, my mother would get it forwarded. So I stuffed it into a bag. Several months later in Siberia, I'm looking for something to read. I pull it out, and there's in Tampere, Finland, there is a theater festival. So I faxed them and I go, yes, come do his talk, all that stuff. And I go, I didn't even know there was a festival. And then I had no idea how I was going to get to South Africa. So my questions were answered. I go to on the train station in Tampere, and there are two women frantically looking into the windows and running along the train. And then they rush to the door when I get out, and I go, "Oh, hi, you're Thomas?" I go, "Yes." They go, "They're waiting for you." "What do you mean waiting for me? I thought it was tomorrow, my talk." And he goes, "No, it's happening now. They're all waiting for you at the library, the city library." And there's like 100 people sitting there waiting for me, right? And I'm like 10 minutes late. I go, "Whoa." I give the guy my slides. I go, "Put him in a carousel and let's go with it." Right? Talking. 10 minutes into it, there's this woman who's really like, she's just beaming in the front. Whatever I'm saying, she likes it. She has a seat that's vacant next to her. This guy comes in with long hair, Viking looking guy. He sits down, and within a minute or so, he's snoring. And I'm going, "Hey," I'm like clapping my hands. I go, and he's like, I'm sorry. I'm very tired." It's like, okay. So he's like trying to stay awake. And then it was like a running joke. People thought it was part of a performance I was doing. Afterwards, he comes to me. I go, "I'm repeating nothing." All right. So you missed it. He goes, "No, I'm so sorry. I came from Samiland and I want to, see. I wanted to sleep. But my friend Ida Lotus said you must do this." And so I go, "Fine. Okay." He goes, "Do you want to work in Zambia?" Like that. He went to the Finnish volunteer service, and he was on a 2-month leave in Finland, but he worked there for 5 years, recording rituals and doing this exact same type of work I was doing, creating performances with local groups. And so I go to South Africa for my second performance that I'm working on. 6 months later, I never heard from him. It's like, okay, you talk to people, things fall through. I get a call. He goes, "We have the funding, everything's set. When can you come to Zambia?" So this is how it's kind of moved. The last one I'll tell you about chance, and there are many others. I was on break in Zululand, have been doing this tour show, the second time I worked with the Zulus. And I went to an environmental fair because they were South Africans were kind of pariahs, international pariahs. So they were trying to like get back into the stream of the world events. And so I go there, I go to the washroom, and there are Bushmen sitting there, like carving. I go, "Oh, what are these Bushmen doing here?" It's like, so I go to the bathroom, I come out, and I said, "What's going on here?" I wanted to figure this out. Why were they in this environmental fair in Durban, South Africa? And this Afrikaans woman said to me, it's a cultural group that they're an art trust project in the Kalahari, and that they're trying to do is assist these people to go to a cash economy. All right. Oh. And I told her what I did, right? And I go, and then where I was going to, work with the Zulu and go to Zambia, etc. She goes, "Okay." It says, then the next day, come back. And then I gave her like some materials of my work, and we sketched out on a piece of paper, like a budget, an idea of what I would do. All right. I'm in Zambia at the Finnish Volunteer Service where I was the host, and I get a call. Right. And I'm seldom at the host office, and I go, "A call? My mother doesn't even know I'm here." I mean, how do you, who's calling me? And it was just happened. I happened to be there. And so I answer, and it's the woman, and I didn't know who she was. She goes, "Thomas, we have the money." I go, "Who is this?" It's like, and it's like, okay. I just totally, I was in the midst of this national big 30-person performance that was like, really ambitious. And it's the last thing I was thinking about. And so she goes, "When can you come?" And so within like 4 months, I'm in the Kalahari working with the known Bushmen. It was all essentially by chance. And I asked a mudong, a shaman in Korea, because I was invited to Korea in a similar way, maybe like 4 years later. And I go, "How come I'm always working?" I asked her specifically. She spoke, decent English. "How come I'm always winding up in these situations?" She goes, "Because you need to be." Mm-hmm. So in a way, it's like you're accepting a responsibility or accepting the journey. So I guess maybe the upshot of what I'm saying is accepting where we are, and that's how I survive. Wherever I am, I accept where I am, and things start talking. It's like when you talk to a person, if you're judging someone, you're not going to hear half of what they're saying. If you're open to someone, they may be telling you information that you didn't even know you needed to know. And this is kind of how I conduct my life. Chance is how the spirits speak. They're always talking, and so we're not always listening, or we don't know how to listen, or we've forgotten how to listen. So I'll just end it there because I'll ramble a lot. But I mean, I can go into detail and other stuff, but that's kind of like how I see it and how I move through it.
It's interesting what's emerging, right? And this thought that we create our own reality. And the response is, no, we co-create our reality. We're dancing with the universe. right? Yes, the universe is talking. Yes, we can listen. Yes, we can open up. And then you find your right path. You find your destiny. You find your purpose in life. And doors open, right? And it's also interesting how much the world needs ritual and myth. And that's what you trade in. That's what you help revive. And so it's interesting that, yeah.
But also being in that space to
That
allow
you need
the
to
flow
be there.
state, to allow that flow state of life to take you on that journey. I mean, you could have very possibly ended up in Chicago or LA or in New York doing theater the rest of your life, doing a traditional approach to theater, and been extremely successful and accolades and big ego strokes. And you say, well, Alaska, okay. And then, yeah, go here.
But you knew there was more. You knew that wasn't where you meant.
Yeah.
You know,
You
here's
would
an
have missed out on all of that.
observation
Yeah.
that I have dealt with in my life. I sometimes feel, where's the party? Where's the action? I'm not there. I'm not. It's a sense of I'm not where I'm supposed to be, right?
Yeah.
And then you realize, well, where is that? You have to kind of do your GPS. Where is it? Where am I supposed to be? And finally, you realize that when you are living on those terms, you are the center of your own universe. You are the center where you're meant to be. You are where the action is. You're a font for that action, right? You're a font for, and what by action, I mean the flow of life, the flow of the universe talking.
How does spirit work?
And we had to argue this. You know, this is an ongoing argument we're having. I would love to focus on this, just in general, people, right? Who we're talking to. But there's this current debate that we're having between what is science and what is pseudoscience. And I'm with another group having this conversation about and I say it's not pseudoscience, it's the emerging science. It's what's wanting to emerge, right?
Yeah.
Okay, it doesn't have the good housekeeping seal of approval of science on it, but neither does the Big Bang, technically. Look at what plate tectonics had to go through for a century before it was accepted because of overwhelming evidence. Right. Look at the Wright brothers, where the pundits of the day wouldn't even bother to go take a look at their field and see, I got a plane off the ground for 3 seconds. Yeah. Boom. Look what we've done, shooting rockets to the moon, right? So, I mean, yeah, it takes a while. There's a curve before something's accepted. So we're having this debate about what is pseudoscience. Don't tar it with a stick. Oh, it's pseudoscience. No, it's emerging. Let's be on the leading edge here. Let's listen to what the universe wants to present to us and show us.
And it comes back to that. Thomas, you're a great example. And I think all of us, this isn't just your personal story. It's all of our stories.
Yeah.
That either we step into that flow state and listen to the signals of how spirit speaks, or we don't. We have a choice. And we can be restrictive and think that our brain knows it all, and that we don't use the intuitive qualities of just listening to what's happening around us, or we can tap into that.
Well, maybe there's a huge wave of people who didn't go back to their old jobs after the pandemic because they had a chance to stop and think.
Yeah.
And go, I've got a different path in life, right? Where is it taking me?
And that whole idea of stepping out from Chicago and then all of a sudden being exposed to that native way of thinking changes things so dramatically. I know.
Because you had to step in that way of being.
Yeah.
That step in that way of being.
We had a board member join us back in 2012 or something, Alan Ismond, and we did our board meetings, and Laura's talking fast and I'm talking fast, and we're all going around the circle. And he said, he says, I'm a consultant to the Northwest Native cultures. I go to their meetings. When they have a meeting, of course, they do with a talking stick. He says, and one person speaks, and he says, well, I'm thinking that the next thing the tribe needs to do is this. And he lays the stick down on the table, and no one speaks. They just quiet for a few minutes, and then finally someone will pick it up and say, well, I do have a comment now. I've been thinking about we should be adding, and then they throw the stick back down, and there's this nice pause. There's a resonance of intuitive quality that's happening in this, what we call a board meeting, that the council meeting of what's happening, that there's not this intensity of this Western trying to control it with the brain thing.
Or compete.
And it was so nice for us to take a deep breath, relax. This board meeting will be much more successful if we just breathe. So, and
we adopted that. We took the talking stick and we'd go around and not just put it on the table, we went around to each person.
Yeah, of course.
Because those who weren't normally going to speak had a lot to say when you gave them space.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Speaking, going around the circle
Yeah.
and passing
All
the
right.
talking stick, let's go back to Christine now that she's heard everybody's stories and add more to the discussion. And we'll keep going around, and you're both, all three of you are welcome to chime in. Yeah.
I would say in my life, I don't feel like I've ever been in control. I feel like I've been plopped in a stream and it kind of just meanders and takes me where it needs to go. And so it's been very fluid and I guess open to experiences. So yeah, I never dreamed I'd be in Missouri. I never dreamed I'd be a professor. In fact, I was told in elementary school and in high school, don't go to college. I have all kinds of learning disabilities and hearing issues, and I'm deaf in my left ear, which caused me a lot of misery. Growing up and learning how to just speak English was really hard. And I spent years in physical therapy and speech therapy. And that's how I met all my Apache kids, because they are taught that silence is golden and they don't spend a lot of time speaking as children. And so that's why I was put in these classes with special ed. And in the 1970s, special ed was not a good thing to be in. It was rough. But there I was with my Apache friends in special ed. But it just, life took on its own way of doing things. Yeah.
It's interesting, our life path, when we look back at it, how we're equipped with certain lessons or skill sets or teachings or traumas or whatever it is that seems to equip us. We're just filling our little tool belts here to show up then where we're supposed to be, it seems. And like our friend Gwen Spencer would say, when you write your own story as the hero journey, with yourself as the hero of your own journey, you're co-writing that story, you find, with some larger hand.
Yeah.
Right? That's an encounter right there.
Right.
Yeah. And
Yes.
I know we have, yeah.
I was going to say my good friend who I told the Chindi story to, before in the 1990s, I was studying pottery and realized I thought I had a shamanic journey, the entire thing in pottery from about 1250 to 1450. And I started writing on shamanism. And the same guy who accused me of being a mystic said, you really need to keep publishing. You need to do what you're doing. And the spirits want to be heard. You need to be the channel to speak that, which I thought was interesting, because this guy has excavated so many Maya kings and queens, famous Harvard PhD, sitting there saying you need to reach the communities, tell people your stories. And he's like, I really encourage you to keep at it. So it's kind of funny how we came full circle to that. And that night when he said, driving down from the Santa Fe Institute to Albuquerque, he said, you're a mystic. And I argued, no, I'm not. So I'm sitting in my sister's house thinking, I am not a mystic, because I knew the Apache had things like vision quests. Everyone got a spirit animal or totem animal or some helper spirit. And I was thinking, I don't even have a spirit helper. I don't have any of that stuff. I'm just not that person. And I was sitting there thinking about this, and poof, I turn into a huge juniper tree. It wraps around me, hugs me, holds me. And I'm like, then I emailed my friend. He's at the WashU in St. Louis. And I was like, I turned into a tree. He was like, well, of course, the ancestors are wisdom, and that's what you need to do. I keep telling you, Chris, you need to do it. But it was just the weirdest circle of events based on telling that Chindi story too. It's just been an unusual ride. So I don't feel like I was ever in control. I feel like the universe is writing my story for me, and I'm just trying to hang on as I go.
You know how celebrated that connection is and has been in ancient culture, in the myths and the sagas, personally in our lives?
Right.
This is the sacred. And why does our Western worldview push that out?
Right.
We need that desperately, right? We need this collectively. We need to embrace it and just say, it is. Let's listen. We had that conversation with Tyler Volk last week, where we argued with him. We need to be able to speak in mythic terms. We need to say the Gaia is alive. We need to embrace Gaia. We need to say the world is sacred. We need to say this is a living womb of creativity, this whole entire cosmos. Why can't we say that? He He conceded. Yes. As a scientist, I guess we need this. Yes.
As a biologist and scientist.
Yeah.
Yeah. And coming back to Christine, your story, I mean, and what I appreciate about you is that you continue to integrate that into you as a professor, as a teacher, that you actually have encouraged your students to follow some of the conversations that we have here. You contacted me recently about the Corinne Dempsey interview, and you wanted to share that with your students and giving them credit for coming and listening to some of these discussions. I mean, how bold of you.
She's even invited us to go talk to them. Yeah, that was lovely.
Very cool. Very cool. Thank you, Christine. Yeah, and Fredrick, I gave the talking stick back to you because we haven't even touched on India. We just talked about Santa Fe.
But first, let me just say that Tony has a talking stick. Maybe he can just show it to us briefly here. And
Oh, yeah. Spotlight Tony.
I'm trying here.
Yeah.
There we go.
Oh, there you go. And
So-
here's
so-
another
so-
scientist mystic. Yeah.
So Tony, what's your impression? What's your sense of the way a talking stick is supposed to work?
Yeah. My sense is that it is an opening vehicle, that it gives everybody a chance to speak and not be talked over, to
Right.
see what comes out. And something comes out when you have a monologue, when you are reaching inside yourself. That does not happen when it's back and forth. And when you're thinking about what you're going to say next, what the next person is saying and why they're wrong and you're right and how I'm going to correct them and stuff like that, something very different happens if you just speak from your heart, not quite knowing what the next sentence is going to be out of your mouth. And I think this is enabling for that. And it also has turned out to be useful in parties where I use a structure like this, where some people don't get it. I can explain it in terms of a talking stick, and it makes a difference.
Yeah.
It really makes a difference.
Well, then let me share an exercise that Paul invented that helped to bring that out, that very thing. We, I recommend this to all couples. Really, I truly do. It's a great exercise, and all you need is a timer that dings.
Similar to a talking stick.
But have you ever had in your life where your partner goes, I really don't want to do this, but I'll do it for you. And I'm like, well, I didn't want to do that. I thought I was doing it for you, right? And so you mix signals. And so it's really important to know why you're headed in the way you're headed, or what projects you're taking on, or what you're doing. And so Paul said, look, he brought a timer and he said, I'm going to 4 minutes. I don't know why 4 minutes for 4 minutes.
Yeah.
He said, I'm going to talk. Then when it dings, the rule is I finish my sentence and then you talk. So we went back and forth from the head.
Yeah.
And then we kept going. And this is the interesting part and the point of my story. We kept going and we would open our mouth and I would hear myself talk. I didn't know that I felt what I felt until I heard myself say it. So what part of me was coming forward to share in that 4 minutes that it wasn't from here? It was I didn't know.
Right.
But and it was really deep and moving. It was like I'm witnessing, hearing myself, and I knew it was true and I knew it was authentic, but I hadn't had grasped it until I gave it space to show up. It was wild.
Yeah.
It was wild.
That's for that communication to happen.
Yep.
And I just, since we have Tony on screen, I just wanted to mention also, of course, being an astrophysicist, and you also push that envelope of the unknown. I mean, that's the whole idea of space exploration, is not looking to go look at what you already know. You want to go look at what you don't know. You want to find out new stuff, like that new star. They get the first photos coming back from the James Webb telescope that happened last week. So, I mean, that's your inspiration. That's the edge that you reach for. That's what drives you, right? I mean, that's what keeps you going.
And dreams of flying as a little boy.
Yeah, well, all these things are part of it, of course. And one of the things which I really believe is, going back to Laura's comment earlier, that we get ideas, we get understandings of things. And the difference between science and pseudoscience, to my way of thinking, the basic process is probably the same. But at one point, you have to elevate something to a different level. You have to put certain criteria on, or it becomes just, if you have 12 people in a room, they may have 12 different opinions, and maybe only one's valid type of thing, or maybe several are manipulative or different bad things. The scientific method is then applied, every discovery I've made without exception has come from an inspiration. It comes when I'm walking, it comes from a dream, it comes from whatever. When I was an undergraduate, I was working at a brand new facility at MIT. It was the biggest and most impressive radio telescope of that kind ever developed. And they couldn't point it. And they had teams of people from MIT and Harvard on trying to figure out the problem. And I was working on this with the technician, making observation after observation. And then one day, as an undergraduate from the University of Pennsylvania, I woke up and I knew the answer, and I told my boss. And it was, and this is something that all the horsepower from MIT and Harvard could not figure out because they had not listened. And I guess I had listened. And so I wrote out the equations, and I learned how to program a computer, and I wrote my first paper from this. But but this is where things come from. You study it out, and then they come to you, and you listen.
But
I'm sorry, I don't mean to talk too much. But
this pathway from pseudoscience, or an inspiration, a thought, an observation, pseudoscience to science, is a journey. And so as something's emerging, it hasn't gone through the scrutiny yet, or it's in progress, right?
Yeah.
And the phenomenon we were talking about was the power of intention.
Right.
Like when we talked with Dean Radden and Brenda Dunn,
Right.
the random number powered random generator number, and its influence on machines, right? Pseudoscience. It's like, no, it's emerging science. We use this. We use the power of intention. We use prayer. We use focus. We use imagination. We use ritual. We use it. But is it going to become scientifically validated at some point? It's emerging in that direction. That was our big, an ongoing discussion.
Yeah, the word pseudoscience.
People with whom I'm debating it, I want them to see these answers.
Sure.
The word pseudoscience, I basically relegate to those people that have an inspiration and proclaim it to be truth without doing further work.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
Okay.
So the source may be the
does
same,
exist.
or it may not. And of course, it's possible for bad ideas to come to people too. But I think by and large, if you study something out with an open mind, an open heart, if you listen to the voices that come to you, however they come, then you follow through, and amazing things happen. And I don't want to take away from Thomas and Chris and Fred at all, but thank you for asking this. And I think the experiences I'm hearing from the great research of these three people are probably all aligned with this, that they have a validating experience, that something has happened in the dust devil. Something has happened being called from one place to another, as Thomas talks about. Having the experience that Fred talked about, this is marvelous, and I really appreciate hearing these, and I totally give them credit.
Yeah.
Because in the end, the stories that were shared were about the universe talking to us through the wind, through the light, and through coincidence, right?
Right.
And doors open, doors close. Yeah, we dance with the
Fredrick,
universe.
you're going to say?
Yeah.
Yes, I appreciate everything that I think there's a topic here that we're kind of talking within and around, and that's really what Tom brought up on communication. And this kind of gets back to what was really kind of the epicenter of much of my research in India over about the last maybe 8 years. I had done most of my research. I mean, I've been in India for like 20 years, and for a lot of that time, most of that time, I was down on the hot, dusty plains that constitute 95% of India. There's that other 5% that's up in the Himalaya mountains. And when I started working on a big project on the great Indian national epic called the Mahabharata, I moved up to the Himalaya because that was Mahabharata country. And I wanted to do my work up there where it was. And I discovered that that there was this kind of superimposed geography of contemporary geography superimposed upon classical, religious, Mahabharata epic geography of thousands of years ago, and that the Mahabharata, epic as it was alive and well up in the Himalayas, although in a completely different form. It would be like an amazing hallucination of some kind on the original to get to where it was in the Himalaya today. And what I discovered is that there was ways of communicating that world with the present world. And it was done in a certain ritual way where there were three people involved, or three parties involved, let's say, three persons, if we want to talk about personhood. There was a deity, there is an oracle, and there is a client. And there's these sessions that were involved where they would kind of move around and communicate with each other. And that was so fascinating to me that I thought, you know what? I'm going to apply for a Fulbright grant. I want to get to the bottom of this dialogue, of this communication. How does it happen that they can communicate with the gods and the gods can communicate back with all kinds of knowledge that nobody would ever have? And so I applied for it, and by God, your US government gave me about as much money to support me for a year as maybe they would give for a hubcap on a B-1 bomber or something like that. So I went there for a year and to look into this, to kind of unfurl the layers of this incredible communication. And I knew where to look by then. I knew where to go. I knew how these deities kind of traveled around by being carried on palanquins from village to village in really remote locations. And people would come with their personal problems, and the deity itself, himself, herself, would appoint an oracle du jour. Okay, it would just kind of dance around, and the people carrying it on their shoulders, all of them unanimous, say, we have no idea what's going to happen if the deity jumps up and down and shakes them around in different directions and just starts moving around in circles and running. And this thing probably weighed about maybe 70 or 75 kgs, maybe more than 150 pounds, each one of these palanquins with the deity kind of bound tightly in the middle of it. And they would run around, they would just select somebody as the oracle du jour. And that person would then kind of serve as the vehicle through which the deity would then communicate with the client. And the client would walk up to this. I mean, I have a lot of videos of this. It's
Talk about emergent.
I hardly imagine even what it looks like. And somebody comes up and says, listen, there's been all sorts of bad things happening in my family lately. A couple of my cows have died, and just bad things have happened in my house, and I don't know why. And then the oracle would translate that, God knows how, into the language of the devata, of the deity. And the deity would then communicate by various kinds of signals that the oracle was empowered on that day to understand.
Only
And
that
then
day and only that moment?
only that, well, there were certain kind of fixed codes. That's what I wanted to get down to in this research, to talk about the scientific method, is what were these codes that were used between deity and oracle, that the oracle then knew how to translate to the client. And the whole circle goes around one way, it goes around the other way, like that. And but I saw really a lot of incredible things happen there, and where they were able to find missing objects, or there was this whole communication of like numbers of times that they would bow down in this direction, bow down in that direction, go up and down. It was movements. It was all kind of very kinesthetic, the language of the deities. But nobody could understand what they were doing except the oracle, who was connected up for that day.
Hmm.
You know, and
Like a
then maybe they'd move on
bandwidth
to the next village a
opened.
few days later, and then somebody else would, some local person in that village would assume the role of the oracle, and so on. And you know, and maybe they would travel around for a month or two every year, and then stay in their own village for, you know, for the rest of the time. But there was this kind of communication, and there was, because, you know, once you get to people in small, remote mountain villages, you know, they're not going to ask questions like, tell me about the nature of the self, or bullshit like that, you know.
Hmm.
It's not going to be
Give us some
discourse
practical knowledge. Yeah.
practical knowledge, like why are my cows dying, or, you know, why haven't I heard from my son in Bombay for the last year, that sort of thing.
The
um,
emotionally heightened stuff.
the emotionally
We
heightened
always
stuff,
talk
I
about a
mean, that's
covenant
true.
between, the very long-standing covenant between this realm and that realm. And I know
Yeah,
Thomas has been describing it, Christine's described it, you're describing it, but these steps of ritual. Ritual is part of that formula, right? That way to open the door, way to set up communication, way to set up that flow. These codes between the deity, the oracle, the client, divination, contact with the divine. And I think that's what we've been describing is these encounters. We in the West can't explain them, but they're encounters with those larger realms. However it shows up or is prompted, or the circumstances or the need or the dial up. We always call what we do, let's dial it up on demand, right? So it's so
I'll tell you,
fascinating.
I had an initiation by fire in that, which I don't talk about much, but it's there. And that is that my longtime partner died in an accident in,
Yeah.
when was that? 2016, 2017. And I had to take care of her soul for the next 1 year. I just decided I was doing that. And the rituals that were kind of fixed, that would kind of liberate her from the bondage of earthly existence. It was my duty to do all of that. And I'd studied this stuff before academically, so I knew the kind of litanies, and it's exceedingly complicated, like any Indian ritual, made up of thousands of parts, like a spinal cord and the parts of a human body. It's very, very complicated. But I basically knew what it was. So when I was on the spot performing this, you could really see what those connections were. I mean, it was brilliant the way that they actually thought about this stuff like 3,000 years ago, and committed it all to some kind of ritual order of connecting up the worlds, connecting the deities with the performers, with the ritualists, with the clients, and how the different parts of your spirit, your soul, your subtle body, your permanent essences, plural, would be constructed to move with that into spaces where you really knew that there was a progression going between, say, their actions, my being the center of it, and the trajectory of her soul on her way through whatever world she was going through and will continue to go through. And it was just kind of blew my mind the way that happened, until finally at the very end, after a year of performing these things, I saw her just come into my hands and just dissolve into 1,000 pieces.
Wow.
It
Oh
was,
my
I mean,
gosh.
that's the kind of thing that the really, really effective ritual can do. But you're not going to experience it unless you have to, in a way.
Right.
I mean, I kind of had to. Otherwise, I wouldn't be in that situation where I was opportunistically um, uh, guided, I suppose, by the fact that I was there on the spot in India when she died and all that stuff. So all of that was,
Yeah.
kind of, that's how I was prepared better than I thought I was. I consulted with a whole team of people there, ritualists. I said, what should I do, this, that, or the other, like 6 different things we discussed it for several days about how to go about it. And it turned out we did all the right stuff, but it was kind of amazing. This stuff can work, and it doesn't have to be one tradition or another. It can be anything, but you really need to be open to those lines of communication. But you can open ourselves. We can open ourselves. Doesn't take any special power, but we really, really can do it. That's what I discovered. End of monologue.
Not a monologue at all, and it's a deep personal sharing, and that's really important to all of us. Thank you for opening up like that, because I think each of us have a story in our life somehow that there's that transitional moment that you had that education of ritual that helped you with that processing of how that would all take place, and so that's.
And I don't think we need to say one ritual over another. I think that the important thing is that there's communication, there's listening, there's an exchange. You show up with your heart, you show up with gratitude, you show up with an openness, a state of being, and there's many different formulas. It's not. The power for me is not in the formula. The power is in the intent to show up and open the door and have the exchange. Right. And there's many different formulas around the world, but it would be so fascinating to see what they have in common. What are the essentials of that formula? And I know, Christine, you've looked at it from 2,000 years ago in Pakeme and Casas Grandes. In particular, you've done a wide search among the ancient cultures of Mesoamerica and the American Southwest and generally in the world. And Fred, you've looked at it in India, and Thomas, you've traveled the world looking at ritual and turning it into modern theater, so bringing it for today. So it's interesting that we have from the past, present, and future. It's just fascinating team right here. To speak to that.
Fred was able to draw upon that 3,000-year history for that whole ritual to come to place. Yeah, go ahead, Christine.
Well, I think we need to mention Felicitas Goodman, her ritual and calling of spirit. She has several great books that deal with this, and I don't like the title, but the book's really good. The 1988 How About Demons, all about spirit possession. But she talks about the ritual steps and that you have to do the ritual steps to get the ritual key to open that communication. And she's very clear on what she thought, how that worked. And it's a really great read for those purposes and what she saw as universals across time and space with rituals. So I just want to bring her up because I really enjoyed that book, and I think she's on to something.
I didn't want to do it, but I'm glad that you did. I don't want to keep preaching. Hey, look at our institute.
It's so hard for me not to keep going back to her, because actually my own work on trying to understand spirits, the so-called unknown, with my own book that's under review, I kept going back to Felicitas. She had a lot of really good work in the 1980s that I'm still grappling with. And Fred's book is wonderful. Thomas's plays are great. There's still so much to learn.
Thank you for pointing that out. And Thomas spent a week with her back in the 1990 or something, and get to pick it.
That's lucky, fortunate.
Part of how Thomas's journey continues. He gets a signal. He goes here. He goes there. It's like, oh, this is this lady in New Mexico. I'll go see her. see what she has to add.
Do you want to speak to that? Your time, because we appreciate that you still use her ritual formula in your work and adapt it.
Inspired by it. Yeah.
Yeah, I've just, as I mentioned before, I was just reading an article that she wrote, and by happenstance, a few days before that, I was reading a travel log from a Russian from the mid-19th century, and he described, not explained, but he described these postures, and the same postures came up in Felicitas's article. So it was like 1990, so I just called information, and I got her. She answered, and we talked for an hour, and then that summer I went down to visit with her. So it was that simple.
Yeah, perfect.
And she's looking at ecstatic trance. She calls this ecstatic trance for both the joy and the sense of gratitude and awe and wonder that you're left with. But also ecstasis, stepping outside the norm. Mm-hmm. So it's a good name. But Christine, I know you and I looked at flourishing, right? We looked at the hallmarks of flourishing, gratitude, compassion, emotional intelligence, emotional resilience. Just, we call them the virtues, but really it's about the joy of life. And it seems to me that when you are in that state of being, when you open the door, be it through so many means, you plug your finger in the socket, that life force that flows through you, that informs you, that shapes you, that spills out of you, that's flourishing. That is. You can hardly encounter the universe on its terms, in dialogue with it, and not be in a sense of awe and wonder and compassion and joy. Do you want to address that? Because I know that we've had many dialogues on this.
Right. I was going to say everything you just said. I'm very appreciative of Felicitas' early work, in which she also looked at it, neurologically at the time with EEG. She also did blood work and looked at heart rate, and she showed that, nephrine and other hormones go down and the beta endorphins go up. And so there's actually a real physiological response that impacts us where we do feel ecstatic. So there's so much that's going on, both from whatever spirit is, but also that impacts our own being and as physiology and neurology to create this wonderment of self and well-being, but also connected to the universe. That's something she didn't get into in her book, but I agree, Laura, there's something that happens that expands all of this in a way that I don't think science, whatever science is, methodology, I like the methodology that Tony talks about. That's really important. But I think there's still a lot of, I'm sorry, I'm an archaeologist, a lot of rocks to uncover neurologically and physiologically for us to start to look at that. And that's actually stuff with Cuyamungue that I'm trying to work on. I'm shifting my work from an archaeologist more into medical anthropology, for those that don't know. So Laura, Paul, and I, and my husband, Todd, are working on that. So we have state-of-the-art brain lab here at Mizzou. So I don't know, lots to explore, lots to study, but Felicitas is on a good path, as are Thomas and Fred. Great works, both of you guys.
One thing I like about the ecstatic trance state, accessible to everybody. You don't have to be a mystic. You don't have to follow a 20-year path. You don't have to give anything up. It's integrated into our life. It's a natural state of being. And I think that moving forward into the world, with all the challenges that we're facing, we need to understand we have a natural state of being in joy and nourishment here that's available to us. I mean, humanity's facing some major challenges. Why not tap into what it's giving us as well, with which to move forward with that? And Fred, you mentioned the sages of the ages and the methodologies of these rituals to get answers that, where else do they come from? It's informing us. Thomas, you talked about there's intelligence in all this, right? Where are the answers going to come from? And maybe this is one of the avenues that we need to start tapping as a world, as a globe, to find our way forward and to be encouraged and to just lay down the arms and the differences and the nonsense, right? We just need this. We need to return to this.
Yeah.
Right? And it's here, it's so available.
And
and go ahead.
When to act, when to not.
Yeah.
This I'm going to bring this up, Fred, and I'm going to butcher the story, but isn't it the story of Arjuna sitting on the edge of the battlefield, trying to understand whether to engage or not? There's some story there that I always have reflected back on all my life, that there's that time when you have to take action, when you have to be in a position of being a warrior, and other times when you just need to observe, and to finding that balance.
Well, that's basically the story of the Bhagavad Gita.
Yeah.
And Arjuna was paralyzed by indecision, and the whole Gita is Krishna giving Arjuna all these reasons why he needs to engage in this war, as kind of a just war and all of that stuff. I mean, we can look at that however we might today or whatever, but that's
maybe it's a metaphor for stepping up.
Yeah,
right.
A metaphor for stepping up. I mean, as Tony said in a comment here on the side on the chat room, that at the moment of life, at a moment of life or death, has anyone been instructed how to survive by a quite clear voice? Well, you can say that Arjuna was instructed by a quite clear voice, And eventually he followed that clear voice. But I think what Tony probably meant was if you're like, you know, you're like on a road and there's some crazy driver 30 seconds ahead of you, did anybody give you a clear voice to say, get the F off the road right now? And then you did it. And there are, of course, countless cases of that, and anecdotal cases. And at what point do millions of anecdotes, add up to being something that we can say is more than just weird, uncanny eccentricity. I mean, there are these communications, and certainly the unexplained, as far as I'm familiar with the unexplained, to get back to our main subject, is that the universe, the world, is filled with beings of different substantialities, densities, or whatever, that they're aware of us to some extent, and we're aware of them to some extent, but we don't focus on that because we have a whole lot of other stuff with greater densities to take care of, whether it's psychological stuff or wars, or getting up and combing our hair and getting out of bed and making breakfast and just doing what we got to do in life. But there are we can develop these talents, but that's not where our education is directed. I mean, there was a choice around maybe 500 years ago between the direction that science was going to take in Europe towards this kind of science we have now, or between different kinds of alchemy. And the alchemical traditions and their political forces, they kind of came in, they kind of lost the political battles. So science has developed in a very different way than it might have otherwise. I can't get into that here, but that's kind of the broad outline of it. But if you go back and read some of these works of people like Ramon Lull and Lull, people like this, John D, even back to Giordano Bruno, who was one of the last of the great, who was burned at the stake in the year 1600. And when he was a college student at Oxford, he was fined 5 shillings for disagreeing with Aristotle. So, there's certain ways in which science has been forwarded in our time. But there are other ways of going about it, and these traditions are not dead by no means. And it's interesting. It would be interesting to pursue them in the way that Tony talks about a scientific method, because that is possible. Anyway, I will back off of that and say that, yeah, I mean, it would be great to see if anybody here in the shooting gallery here and has a story like what
Okay,
Tony
while
does
you
here,
while
like
you
this,
look
I'd be
through,
curious.
I'm going to share one because you've mentioned deers and you've mentioned driving down the road. And I was driving down the road by myself in a tiny little car and notice a deer coming at me and going, oh my God, here it is, the classic deer accident. I'm going to die, not in a big car. And so I'm just talking to the deer and saying, you want to move this way. I'm imagining the deer just veering off. And the deer comes, and I'm driving, and rather than intersecting, the deer just moves off right at the angle I had imagined him to start moving. So, power of intent, all right? Emotional need, right there. I was terrified. So there's an example. And then Paul left, so I don't know how to put anybody on the mic.
Well, one of the
I just want to reiterate a question that Tony asked for Tom,
Yeah.
which is, what were some of the Russian postures you referred to?
Oh, Thomas, yes, thank you. And then we'll get to you, Christine.
I'd have to look at my notes, and I'm in Cleveland right now, and I don't have access. But they were kneeling, and in the travel log they were kneeling, and there were 3 shamans kneeling, and I'm not sure, and I want to get it right. which posture it was according to Felicitas's identifier. But it was kneeling with the hands on their knees. And I'm not sure which one that is off the top of my
So
head.
we have several of those from Mesoamerica that you would know. And I did buy that book that you recommended, and I thumbed through it, and I couldn't find that reference. So I need to find the. I'd love to see that book and go grab a copy of it. Let's make sure that that's in our archives. Christine?
I was going to say, one of my favorite ones of the kneelers with the one hand on the knee that's dropped and the other hands on the other knee kneeling and their foot's twisted around and under. Felicity would call that the Tennessee diviner.
Yeah.
And that's something that I see in Casas Grandes, and it's something that Todd, Laura, Paul, and I are looking at, because there seems to be some way that if our body's like an antenna that we're seeing with all these different cultures, and with Cuyamungue research that is channeling our communications happening, certain things are being seen by everyone. That's what we're working on with Laura and Paul, the Tennessee diviner, which is interesting.
She named it after the effigy.
Sandy.
Yeah, in Tennessee, but also we see it in Egypt. We see it in Mesoamerica. You have pots.
And Casas Grandes.
And Casa Grandes. And what's so fascinating also, I wanted to mention about the lessons that are gifted to us in this ecstatic trance state where you're fully awake. It's not possession trance. It's just, for anybody who doesn't know about our work, it's you are in two minds at once. You are fully aware, you're here, and you're also having this wonderful journey in another state, like a very intense daydream, very vivid, a lot of sensory activation going on. But what is so fascinating is that we can go around and do a sharing, and people will describe this vision. And Christine, you have, and from this posture and the other ones, you will pull your pot down, and she's actually said, "You there? This is what this symbol means. This iconography over there, that perfectly relates to your experience." And so we're finding that these are through time consistent. And people can ask, well, what does a posture have to do with any of this? And we have maybe a handful of instances, and that's why you're finding a Russian account, a description of 3 shamans in a posture is so important, Thomas, because we have a handful of accounts where we can directly tie, yes, posture, shamanic practice. Right. And we have like a woodcut, we have an eyewitness report, we have another ceramic illustration. So just a few of them. And also Amy Cuddy's verification, who wrote the book Presence and gave one of the most popular TED Talks of all about your body language shapes your experience. Right. And she says, Wonder Woman standing with her feet apart, Wonder Woman, she's powering up, right? Superman, you can see him. I think it's so fascinating. Our culture instinctively knows power pose. Let's put Wonder Woman, who's very powerful and got superpowers in this pose culturally. But we can find the same ceramic descriptions, Mesoamerica, Old Europe, Australia, I've seen it, and around the world. Right. We can see this. The ancients knew. And then her research is, stand in this for 2 minutes, just 2 minutes, outside of ritual. Just stand in it, and you can see a significant rise in your testosterone, and therefore your feelings of confidence. Right. So ancient knowledge revived, right? Yeah. And for our benefit, why not?
And just to mention, we always follow the traditional protocol that Dr. Goodman established, where we have people hold a posture, but we don't even show them the artifact. We want them to have that natural, innocent experience of what that...
Without leading their intellect.
Without leading them to say,
or imagining.
I'm supposed to be in Mexico. Like, no, you don't know where you're supposed to be.
That's not the point.
Yeah, right.
The point is, what wants to come up, what vision. So
right.
So interesting.
Back to the power of ritual.
Okay. So there are steps that humankind can take to open the door to dialogue with the universe, right, even more powerfully, even more readily, opening the bandwidth, right? We've had those talks.
Right.
So this is the point. So we're looking at ritual around the world. You've described so many in your time with us, Thomas, watching the ritual. You haven't even talked that much about your theater work, but you showed us watching the rituals of the Miao in China and elsewhere. And Fred, you've described those rituals that you've attended, and Christine's participated with us. So we're just seeing, seeing how ancient peoples have done it.
And Thomas, that whole...
And currently, these are old traditions also revived as well.
It may not be universally accepted, this whole concept that theater came from ritual, but there's obviously, this is part of your whole research and where you stand, is that there's a direct connection, that the two are a spin-off, that the idea of theater, it has its roots.
Oh, I know people say prostitution's the oldest profession. No, theater.
Yeah.
We were doing theater a lot earlier. So.
Thomas.
I'm of the camp that theater basically went from something that was cosmocentric ritual into something anthropocentric, meaning human. So theater basically is social remediation. Not that wasn't a part of ritual, it's just that it was only a section of it. And just look at any television program, any live theater performance, you'll seldom, if ever, see animals or the environment or the flora involved in some sort of dialogue. It's all about humans have a problem and let's remediate and conflict resolution. And it follows that arc, which is highly rational and progressive. So it's really very much of that limited world way of looking at the world in terms of rational cause effect, linear progression, not in a holistic way. So when you work with indigenous people, there's no need for exposition because exposition, you're living in it and it surrounds you. Right. And the function is not to simply remediate humans, but to remediate humans within a larger context. So there's, the way I see it is like essentially theater drew out, and probably it occurred, with the Greeks. And if you look at the ancient Greek theater, progressively became more human-centric as it progressed through. And then the gods started falling to the side or became secondary. And then we get into Roman theater, which is basically a similar thing. And the gods are almost like decorative in comparison, and then they just fall away. So you kind of see this progression.
I think I agree with Laura. The Upper Paleolithic cave art, I think, was drama ritualized, probably a form of theater itself. I think that as they were doing stuff deep in the cave, these are really hard places to get to. They're deep within. They have torches going. They're painting them. They're probably telling the stories, probably calling in the animals, painting the animals, the horses, the bulls, the anthropomorphs, and putting them up on the walls, using the walls, 3D to do it. But I think that's a form of theater that goes back probably 40,000 years ago, at least. That would be my thought as an archaeologist.
For me, theater,
how I think about it. Yeah.
Right. Theater basically is a Greek term to see. It's a seeing space. So,
cool.
and then it came as a removal. Whereas ritual, I've never been to a ritual which is front on. They're immersive, and they're in a community. And they don't exist in a front-on situation. So theater, I would say, rather than theater, as you're mentioning, I would say theatrical. It has theatrical elements, which is very much a human-centric kind of like imposition or application of the term. And then the ritual itself is, and I agree, it is, I think the first technology of humans is a way of, and probably advanced our thinking and our way of being in the world by essentially articulating and formulating and creating forms of what surrounded them and then embodying them and then interacting. And so that then encoded the body and mind to move forward into a way to reflect in the totality, whether it's animals or whether it's propitiations to certain deities or identifying sacred spaces. All these things are something more holistic, and it's something that occurred as a way of form. So form was very important. So to do a ritual is to do a form, and you follow it. And in all the traditions I've been involved with, strict adherence to a form and sequencing is very important, because in a sense you're reiterating and reaffirming the cosmology. You're basically involved. You're involved in it. You're basically reenacting the cosmology, and the cosmology is encoding itself on you, and that's kind of like a home that you go to. So yeah.
I would say a lot of anthropologists talk about cosmology, the study of the universe, but more importantly, it's the human's role within the cosmology. So they talk about these spaces as being pieces of a cosmogram. That's one of my favorite Mesoamerican terms, cosmogram. And so you're taking the cosmos, bringing it down to a small space, and then doing everything you said, Thomas. I think that anthropologists probably are a lot more liberal with the term theater than probably you are. We use it probably much broader, our dramatized performances and things like this. Yeah. It's interesting how the different fields have these nuances. But anyway, I just thought that we see all this stuff early on with humans.
I think we need more cross-disciplinary
Yes, we do.
conversations going on.
The Mahabharata talking to Fred about
Well, that's
the
theater.
the ultimate theater
Yeah.
performance. So, yeah.
Your thoughts on that, Fred, and then you want to take some comments?
No, I mean, yes, I like what both Christine and Tom are talking about. The whole notion of a ritual as a cosmogram, and the key word that Tom used is encoding. I mean, there is this encoding that's going on upon us, within us, through the actual ritual form. I mean, through the physical form that you adopt in the postures here at the Cuyamungue Institute. And I mean, that's the whole thing about it, is there should be some message from some ancient form that we can move into through this encoding. And that's what we're doing, I guess. I'm sure. I know that we're almost getting towards time.
I want to make one
so
comment, and this is a friend of ours and a member of this community and a frequent guest and commenter, Brian Tucker, is looking at and we are speaking with a group of nuns. One of them wrote Cosmic Sparks, the book, and they are finding that spontaneous rituals with nature is something that they're finding very, very useful, very much answering. And we find this fascinating that there they are in a Catholic church,
Catholic.
St. Joseph sisterhood, and they're finding that they still need to go outside the prescribed Catholic rituals to express what is emerging today for them, and that's about working with nature and listening to the universe. And they're putting it in their own terms, but we are finding exact correlations with what we're doing. And so, and Sister Margaret, who's a member of our community and a member of the St. Joseph Carondelet Catholic order, she does both and has done both for 20 years, this work and her work. And she's introduced them to this work.
Right.
And so they're finding it really, they're fascinating. So what I'm finding, I guess my point is that ritual is making a comeback.
Right.
And ritual that we find spontaneously, ritual that we're finding listening within, that we're finding it necessary, so many of us in our lives, to communicate. You spent a year doing a ritual for a specific purpose to release your soul of your partner. Thomas, you are working with ritual for these various indigenous groups to help them find a new expression to deal with what they're dealing with. You're finding great healing work in what they're doing. And Christine, you're looking at the medical neurology of ritual. We're trying to investigate what does it do for flourishing. And these nuns are looking at finding ritual to express what they don't find there in the Catholic Church prescribed. It's evolving. I guess my point is that it's continually evolving. And we are, and people have also accused us of neo-shamanism. And my response is, every culture evolves. Every culture finds its expression for the moment. It needs to be living within us. We need to adapt it and adopt it and make it meaningful and relevant and ecstatic for right now, this moment, because we're living this moment. And we need to listen and follow and dance in the moment with the universe. And I need to speak mythically. There's no other language for this. We need to unpack all these words so that we can speak about this. We need to retrieve what ancient wisdom if you grew up in a society like this would be part of your worldview. This would be part of your daily activity. This would be you wearing the robe of the cosmos around yourself all the time. This would be your dance. We are broken people in our Western society. We have lost our way, and we are desperately trying to find it back and regain our ground so that we can move forward into a future that makes sense, that's whole, that's healing, right? And so I think that these are important conversations to have to reclaim this territory. I say that we've lost our cultural DNA, but we haven't lost our physiological DNA. That still works, and that's going to be our answer to listen to this work through our body, mind, brain, soul, and voice, and dance it again. So I think that's all I wanted to say.
Just to hit.
I think this stuff is important,
Right.
and I
And
really
it's very
appreciate
important
all
what you're
that you all are doing for this.
And to hit the rewind button for a second, Catholicism has changed dramatically, and there was a bunch of stuff that happened within the religion of Catholicism that has changed, and maybe this is a return.
We're trying to get those gals on to speak because I want to hear.
Yeah, well, you know, the
From somebody in
anthropologist who wrote the book "Dancing in the Streets," Barbara, she got a German. She got a German last name, but yeah, she quotes that the Catholic Church didn't have pews until the 300s or something. It was
Yes, I wrote to her and I asked her to come on and talk
we'll
about
try to
dancing in
get
the
her to
street.
come on. So anyway,
Yeah.
so this whole thing's involved. So I just wanted to also say at the same time, it's not that they're creating new things; they're just a rediscovery of what maybe had been a part at one point.
You got to listen to them. They are creating new things.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Does anybody have any questions before we end today? And
If we can go overtime just a few minutes just to get all the comments
Yeah,
in.
we're not.
I really enjoyed this
I'm
conversation.
the clock person.
Thank
she's
you.
not. Yeah.
This was it's just sitting around the kitchen table talking. This was great.
There's no hands going up, but the three of you can speak. Yeah. Fred, you look like you're going to say something.
No, actually, I want to cede to people out there. It's like 5 minutes of theology.
Okay.
Somebody out there, please ask something.
Okay. Fred's
feeling lonely. He wants to hear from you.
Okay, raise your hands. You can use the
So
yeah.
you're in charge. Thomas,
the
Christine,
reactions
you want to
button or
add on to
whatever.
this?
And yeah,
Yep.
maybe you want to ask a question of each other too while we.
Oh, yeah. Interview each other.
Yeah. So.
I agree with Fred. I hope that people ask us questions.
Everybody's
Professors,
shy. It seems
we
like.
extract our students to do something.
All right, I'm gonna-
something.
Yeah. All right. Well, I can't make people ask a question if they don't have it. Go ahead and raise your hand. Bob, I don't look at the gallery view raising of the hands.
I'm gonna look at
I'm looking for the raising of the hands through Zoom. There it is. Tony, of course, we love it that Tony's always keen on following up, and we appreciate that. Hi, Tony. We'll put you back on. And in the meantime, if somebody else wants to add, please join in.
Okay.
Okay, well, this is a question actually for all three. And I'm wondering if there is one more brief story each of you would tell us.
Ah, good.
Because I know you each have vast experience, and I'd love to hear more, of what you've done in the field. This has been very, very interesting. I want to hear more.
I would say this is not a field one, but this is a car one that plays off of Fred. So I had a Ford Fusion 2010, and it was fairly new. And I'm driving up a hill. I park at a stoplight. All of a sudden, it dies. I cannot get it started. And I'm like, oh my goodness. And it's just dead in the water. The engine spurs to life finally in time for a black Mustang going probably 90 miles an hour going through the intersection. If that car had not stalled, I would have been in the intersection, T-boned and probably killed. I never once had another problem with that car, and I had it for a long time, but like 9 or 10 years. But yeah, anyway, so it's one of those ones that I always pause thinking, that's one where the engine seemed to fail, but only one time that ever happened, and it saved my life. So
It's a beautiful.
And you didn't keep the car?
I kept the car. Basil unfortunately totaled it coming out of high school one day. So that was many years later.
Oh, well.
Yeah, but no, it's one of the ones where I just paused because I was like, I'm going to have to call the tow truck. It's it's totally stalled. And like I said, this person ran a red light, and she was going probably about 80, 90 miles an hour in her black Ford Mustang, just really going fast. She never hit the light, never stopped for the stoplight or anything.
Yeah.
Well,
Let's thank that engine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Another story, Thomas, possibly.
Um, I mean, my research always dealt with ritual, and when I work on a culture, but also it brings in trance postures as well as light trances in order to create work. And I was thinking the other day about my work with the Greenland Inuit, and then how we had used a series of trances, and like you had mentioned, sharing afterwards, and then as we shared, realizing the more we trance, the more we were starting to trance kind of collectively in entering trance. And with the Greenlanders, many of them who had lost their dance and cultures early on because they were in the 16th, 17th century colonized by Denmark. East Greenland was more sustained as far as our culture, but they were very interested in using trance. And so at the company's studio one night, the company is located on the North Sea outside of in Jutland, outside of Lemvig, and on a former farm. So it was night. It was raining. The North Sea's pounding, and we went to a trance, which I was drumming for, and also a friend of mine who was also a Danish guy. He was drumming as well. So we kind of and he amplified the drums, so it was very resonant.
Wow.
And what happened was there was like a shock to the room, and everyone at the same time just, what was that? What the fuck? What happened there? And then people were very shaken by it, and to the point where we just had to end it for the night. And what we all suspected before we left, we talked about it. What we suspected was that nearby there were Viking burial grounds, Viking burial mounds. And they have dug up some for archaeological purposes, but they also left many. And so when you see in the summer, they have the rows of the farmers have rows, but they actually just go around it. So it really is quite beautiful. And we felt that we basically called just some sort of spirit from the local area, and they responded because we just all kind of came to that conclusion that whether it's we projected it or whatever, but we all felt psychophysically this profound movement. That night I went to sleep, and as I was sleeping, I was awakened by something, a figure that was coming. At first, I thought it was sleep paralysis, but and which I never have. But I thought, okay, I'm having sleep paralysis for whatever reason. But coming from at dawn, and the change from day to night and night to day is the area where things move more frequently. This figure, which is essentially a stick figure with like an antenna on it, came moving towards me. And I was so afraid that going into like a primal fear mode that I forced myself to wake, and then it scattered. So I think there was something happening there that, our theme today was Unexplained, which I can explain. I tend to not sensationalize, but more or less rationalize in my understanding and understand what the concretes were. But that was maybe something that was a profound effect on one instance of how we use ritual, and then how we evolve trance and to bridge into a performance for contemporary expression, and then how that evoked something. Once you open up the channels, then things start coming through. And because I look at trance and I look at drumming as basically we're kind of a solid, and then what happens is it shakes the molecules, and then things start passing from one to another. So that's kind of my understanding of how trance works, and then how dance works, to shake up things, to jump, to move, to rattle, all these things, and then things pass through. And if you're not adept or qualified, then what happens is the doors open and things can pass through back and forth. And so there's where you need someone who's trained in that and understand once it's open, how do you deal with it?
Beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Well
Make a
said.
safe container.
Yeah,
Do you
yeah.
think that the molecules, that there's something truly in the physical realm that is shifted? Do you think maybe on a subtle energy level or a level that it's hard to measure? Because I will share, go ahead.
I'm just, I mean, you mentioned genetics and DNA. We have the DNA of, it goes back to the origins of our species still
Yeah.
within us. So, I mean, and it holds information, and we don't know what information that holds. And so we're talking to it. We're living manifestations of it. There's Neanderthal, and who else know hominids that are somehow within me. So who knows what I'm shaking up and what's embedded within that DNA that we don't even know about. We didn't know about DNA at all until the 50s, and then we weren't able to map it until recently. So I mean, who knows what the next step is? That there's a memory, and now with they say that people with alcoholism or various mental health illnesses actually imprint DNA genetically, and you pass it on to generationally. So this is all new areas of study, which are just opening up things that, in a sense, other cultures have kind of sensed before and articulated in their own unique way.
Mm-hmm. And even zinc, you can have a zinc deficiency and it's passed down through generations. I mean, it's just interesting how, okay, I'll tell you, and this is one of those interesting studies that I just see a paper on. Belinda Gore, the former president of this institute, and vice president when Felicitas was running the show, helped to conduct. But there was an experiment on gamma rays, cosmic rays, gamma rays. And here's how the paper goes. They have a chamber, and it's isolating everything but a gamma ray. So they have somebody come and do our practice, sit in the room, and they're taking 5-minute interval readings of the gamma ray level inside the chamber and outside the chamber. So pre, during, and after. So they find that gamma rays, and they've been associated with like Reiki. They've also found a similar effect, that the gamma ray radiation level goes down in the practice of Reiki. I've only just Googled that. And so they found it with our practice. Gamma ray, they're coming through, right, the chamber, but they go down, the level readings, and they stay down for 2 days after. So it seems like there's a field effect that lasts. You would think that the effect is only with us performing the ritual, right, and doing the ritual. You can measure it in our physiology, but here's a measurement outside in the field, outside
itself.
of it.
Yeah.
I just give that to you.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
More research needs to be done. Let me
Right.
just say that. An interesting first glimpse. Yeah.
Wow. Fred has done a full on lecture with us in the past, talking about the trance states of India. It's available on our YouTube channel. Thomas has done 3, I think, more like the dynamics of ritual. He had one that was called Ritual Trance and the Yin Yang Balance, and then there was one previous to that one. All fantastic, and
We're only halfway through the
and
latest.
he calls it his home
We need
movies.
to-
He calls it his home movies, but he's provided us with actual video of these rituals taking place in all these different indigenous cultures. Fantastic presentations. You need to check these out.
Oh, as well as more in his life story and journey. That's
Yes,
been
and then
fascinating.
Christine VanPool has been with us from the beginning of these Zoom sessions, and she has podcasts and videos and insights into all of this aspect, including the
Multiple. We should do a page with listing all the.
And she also generously did a podcast called "The Contributions to Anthropology" of Felicitas Goodman, and that's a great thing to listen to, and especially all of you who are involved in the work of the Institute. You want to listen to that for sure. All right. Well, I want to thank you for the entire presentation. It's been really interesting and hard for us to not just want to do another couple hours of just jumping around with ideas, but I'm really excited.
I feel complete.
Yeah, I feel complete. Christine, always love you and so appreciative of all that you contribute. Incredible. Thomas, we continue to talk with you. I'm always so inspired by your work. And and that one main message of yours today, I really want all of us to think about, or maybe not even think about it, but just imbibe it. And that is just following those signals of what Spirit has to say, what's available to you as an individual, following the messages of Spirit within your own life, and not being limited by just the intellect and the location and the whatever, that when a clue comes to you, listen. And that was really powerful to hear your story. Absolutely. And then Fred, I mean, not just becoming another Westerner who does meditation, but moves to India and becomes a religious scholar and follows up on the Vedic traditions and spends a
asks
life.
those key, deep questions as well.
Yeah. It was just absolutely profound. So thank you so much for the three of you to be here today. And I'm going to ask the entire audience to say thank you. I'm going to say everybody can unmute their microphones now. So let's listen in and hear some gratitude, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Great.